This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London.
The title is Torchbearers of Modernity, Western Missionaries, Demonism and Exorcism in Modern China. And the talk itself is slightly shortened to the three most important elements of this paper, namely the missionaries as part of the Christian missions to China and the development of Christianity during the period which I outlined as being between the 1860s, so the end of the Taiping Wars, and the 1930s, which is just before the next round of major warfare starts. The central part, science, will become obvious towards the end of the paper, from middle of the paper onwards, but especially towards the end. That brings in elements of the research that I've done on drugs, for example, and new. This is ongoing research, which hopefully in due course will become a book. And the demons, well, the demons sneaked in. They came in quite unexpectedly when I was searching for signs of spiritual life, and then I discovered that the spirits were developing a life of their own, and I found a number of sources which I'll present to you in a few moments. The paper is far too long for this presentation, so I'm going to summarize the beginning of it, and we'll stick more closely to it from perhaps 1/3 of the way into it. The beginning deals with the heritage of spiritualism in China. Can we try to move this? Here we go. So here you find in Chinese a few elements of spiritualism in traditional China. And traditional China, of course, you can follow back into the very beginnings of what is usually referred to as the imperial period, or even a little bit earlier. Then you end up in the realm of the Confucian classics, but also the first Taoist texts. However, in this case, I'm more interested in popular expressions of spirituality, and these are just some of the elements that go into it. Of course, the very first one is a classic, a Confucian classic, the Li Ji, and the emphasis is on the Li. What are the Li? The Li are the rites, and rites, R-I-T-E-S, is the code of conduct at the imperial court, which everybody, including the emperor, have to follow. They have to adhere to it, because otherwise it might bring disaster onto the whole dynasty and the empire. So this is perhaps not an example of popular religiosity or popular spiritualism, but it shows that from the very beginning the imperial system has been suffused with elements of this. The second one is much more part of the popular realm, namely the festivities for welcoming the spirits, and also for praying with a certain effect. And then following that, you have the recipients of these prayers, namely the Chenghuang, the god of the city moats, the city walls and moats. Tu Di Gong, which is the god for the fields and the whole village, and basically the livelihood of the peasants who depend on on factors such as rain and sun, and also of course. I didn't emphasize this here, but also on the benevolence of the gods that control rivers and mountains. So, and into this you also get the next factor, which will come in a moment, namely what is usually referred to as feng shui, and feng shui is of course geomancy, and translated from the Greek via the Greek. But the main idea is that you don't disturb the forces of nature, and that on the contrary you try to appease the spirits that cohabit with nature. The next two are in actual fact the forces that try to disturb this balance. Who are they? They are in essence those who have learned the arts of manipulating nature against people. And this is something which we'll have to look at very closely again. Especially the last one can be referred to as witchcraft, or it contains the characters for female and for male witches, wizards in that case, and for these, in order to control these spiritual leaders who had the power to influence for the better or for the worse the fate of entire villages, regions, and if you take it in a cumulative measure, also the empire as such. Therefore, you had laws which regulated what these wizards and witches could say and could not say, and importantly, what could be published by them. On them, sorry. Again, taking us back very far into the beginnings, into the roots of towards the roots of Chinese civilization is Taoism. Taoism, I gave here the version Dao Jiao, the teachings of the Tao. But you can see that this is a very complex system of thought which combines popular wisdom and very very laboriously compiled evidence of cosmological nature and the observation of nature, which has a certain lack of written proof, written materials. So you find books such as the I Ching, for instance, but those are the exception. You have a Dao Zhang, you have a Dao Zhang, you have a collection of works on Taoism, but this is nothing compared to what you find on Buddhism, for example, or Confucianism. So, and if you ask a Taoist, they will immediately say Taoism is not an art that you can learn through reading. It's something that you have to experience. So therefore, in the tradition that you can follow up into the late imperial period, written works are usually smaller texts, often very cryptic. And if you look at the item to my right, your left, you can see that it's an attempt to combine different elements. And these elements, when combined with each other, when following a certain pattern of changes, that's again takes us back to the I Ching, they would present a blueprint for the future, the immediate future of the person who's being divined, who's being introduced to what the future holds for this person. So, in other words, this is a case of, refer to it as astrology, or you can refer to it as superstition. This is really we're now on the line that divides orthodoxy from heterodoxy, or from plain superstition, and of course the spin-off which the Chinese peasantry later used as almost as a diktat for what could be done on certain days and what not, is the peasant almanac, the calendar, which is divided into days which are auspicious and days which are taboo for certain activities. And then you had to consult a person who was able to interpret the precise meaning for that, referring to the sowing, the agrarian activities, commercial activities, but then also, biological things like procreation, having children. So you need to be absolutely sure that everything was lined up so that the conditions would be perfect. Here, one big step into the present, towards the present. This is actually something that brings us closer to the essence of the paper, because now we're in the year 1900. This is the period when I'm going to read this first from the who does not know French? Yes, it's the procession pour obtenir de la pluie. So it's a procession in order to produce rain. En été, quand tout est en pleine croissance, il arrive souvent que pendant des longues semaines, il ne pleuve pas. So during the summer, when everything is in full growth, it often happens that over many weeks, over long weeks, it doesn't rain. Les Chinois commencent, and this is Arthur Segers. That's he's there as a, if you like, as an observer, a Christian, of course, himself, and he divides the Les Chinois, the Chinese, and the enlightened Westerners. And this is the whole point of this paper, how enlightened were the Europeans who were in China during that time? Is there such a dichotomy? I'll reserve that towards the end, that judgment. Ils commencent à murmurer, à injurier le ciel et la terre et même leur Dieu. Les notables du village se réunissent pour délibérer, ils organisent un cortège et vont tous ensemble implorer la protection ou les bienfaits de leur idole. Au jour fixé, tous les hommes du village ainsi que les garçons s'en vont à la pagode. Ils y brûlent des bâtonnets, ils font des génuflexions. So, what do? They come together and they curse the soil. They curse the sky and they even their gods. So this is a very disrespectful way of treating the gods in the eyes of this Christian, because you don't, if you believe in a god, you don't hold them responsible for your suffering. And then on a day which has been fixed, and this fixing of the day is something that is done in conjunction with the soothsayers or the diviners who use these old I Ching techniques. They go to all the men in the village, they go to their pagoda where they burn incense sticks and do their genuflections. They go down on their knees, yes. Ils coupent des branches d'arbres et s'en tressent une couronne. So they take twigs and make themselves a crown qu'ils se posent sur la tête pour bien faire remarquer aux dieux qu'il ne fait pas pleuvoir. Toutes les feuilles vont se dessécher sur les arbres. And the meaning of that is, so they go to that god in that pagoda and having this a green crown on their heads, that they symbolize to the god sitting in this pagoda that if it doesn't rain, if it doesn't change his stubborn mind and it starts raining, then all the leaves on the trees will start to wilt and they will fall off their trees, and that will be the end. On sort de la pagode d'idole à face noire qui procure de la pluie. On la place sur un... Oh, hello, Simon. On la place sur une petite table apportée dans ce but, sous une petite hutte faite de branches et de feuilles de saule entrelacées pour protéger le deux contre les rayons du soleil. So now you get the little procession, that's the rain procession. You take this God with his black face out of and the crowns and everything, you take that out into a special place which is protected from the sun, and then the whole ceremony actually begins. This is just the beginning. And do you know which big event in modern Chinese history I'm referring to with this citation? How did one of the most disastrous examples of popular action start in the year 1900? Have you heard of the Yes. Boxer Uprising is in fact, the Boxer Uprising, the Yihutuan, is in fact a development out of these rain-seeking rituals. And the fact is that you had a sequence of many weeks over large parts of northern China, precisely at, as Sega says here, at the most productive time, most important time for the growth for the of the agrarian crop. And when there was no rain to be had, people started looking out for scapegoats. And there were no Jews, there were no Muslims, or they did exist, but they didn't have that cachet at that time. So you look out for the most obvious scapegoat, and that's the foreigners, because the foreigners, with their Yang, with their foreign religion, they were seen as the reason for that. And hey presto, you have people who all of a sudden get visions, and they get dreams in the middle of the night, where it's in the paper as well, where one of them sees the dead bodies of English soldiers marching through a parched field, and the conclusion of that person is that these must be the deceased soldiers. These must be the spirits belonging to the soldiers who came in 1840, who fought with the British against the Chinese, the Qing Empire. And it's the fact that they have never been purged from, that the foreigners have never been purged from China, that the gods are now punishing China, and that that nature is refusing to cooperate with the people. More rain, yes. Here we have another description. This takes us a little bit, this is before the Boxer Rebellion. Now, the rain processions the rain processions, and this is an excerpt from a book by somebody who was, I don't think he was a missionary. That's the no, he was a yes, he was one of the more pragmatic foreigners in China, and but he produced quite useful writings, and one of them is known as Bits of Old China, and there's also one known as More Bits of Old China, I think. And he jots down anything that is either important or not at all important, but he, in this case, he probably thought that this was not very important, but he brings something up which I've seen in other contexts again and again. He brings out the accusation that the Chinese are a terribly democratic people, and he uses it in the condemnatory sense. Why? Because the most to the British at that point, and to many other subjects of imperial states who were present in China and who were observing the world, the most erroneous development of the early 19th century had been the outbreak and development of the French Revolution. And democracy, in the eyes of many Westerners, could only lead to chaos. And the Chinese, they were a prime example of a democratic people. Namely, they had no respect for authority, they had no respect for aristocratic rank, and in this case, in other cases, you have accounts of how people who get dissatisfied with their local magistrates, how they go up to their sedan chairs and shake them out. They kick them out of their little yamen palaces and the means their taxis, if you like, and the observers, and that's usually the English. There's also Prussian source, but observing that, they're quite shocked. They said, how can these people have no respect for authority? But here we have an example how there were in his words, democratic drought revolts, namely people getting together, banding together in order to go to the Yamen and go to places where people thought, general population thought that there was somebody who was responsible for the drought. And they would go to the, in this case, the Baoshun Hang, so it's translated as the Baoshun factory. The factory is, of course, a trading place, a warehouse, protected by Yamen, and Yamen, the Qing officials whose job it is to protect them. They had identified a member of the mercantile guild, so a rich merchant, as the reason. And it's not explained 100% in the text, but they presume, Hunter presumes that he didn't pay his dues, because there are certain rituals, and in popular rituals everybody has to pay in order to create the festivities which are organized every year for certain gods. And there they identify somebody who had not paid his taxes, who was essentially, it was like, what you call them, these 38 degrees or so on the internet. This is the equivalent. This is people organizing a democratic action against one of these. Of course, 15 years later, in the year 1900, these rain seekers would be doing exactly the same with missionary stations, and there are accounts of how they go to, yes, here we have one, yes. So this is one of these accounts, refers to the year 1900, published a few years later. The following night we were roused from sleep by the noise of a rain procession nearing our premises, on the main North Street. A sufficiently dreadful sound at any time, but awful in the dead of night, as a hideous nightmare. We held our breath as we heard monotonous measure that they were opposite and had halted. Then the terror of clamorous cursings, and next the cursings. And you remember the cursings from the other text, that they were cursing the soil, cursing heaven, and cursing the gods. And next the battering of the gate, and a volley of stones and brickbats flung over the roof of the outer buildings into the courtyard, where our own quarters were. Suddenly the volleying and battering ceased, the processions resumed its march, and the terrifying noise of curses, gongs and drums drew away. Shouts of foreign blood must be spilled before we can have rain. And of course there was, if you look at the period, the events of 1900, 1901, as some of us have, then you will be aware that the Ihotuan and the popular culture surrounding these rain seekers had produced a wealth of, well, you can probably call it revolutionary poetry, which was meant to accompany the actions of the group. What else do you use with gongs and firecrackers and drums and so on? You scare away evil ghosts, evil spirits, and that's for that reason you also do that at Chinese New Year. Okay, so let's see, now we're in the middle of it. Having said this, the popular action against the reasons for certain natural phenomena, such as drought, were not without their opponents. And these opponents were by no means the scientific, in quotation marks, Westerners, who first and foremost condemned them as superstitious and not able to make use of their rational faculties, but they were the intellectuals of the late 19th century who were fully trained in the Confucian classics and who were in actual fact they had internalized the body of literature which is known as the classics Jing and this Jingwen. Experts, they could go back into the very beginnings of the Confucian tradition, and they could see that the great master himself had said that people should stay away from the from anything spiritualistic. They should know of the spirits and ghosts, but they should not actually engage with them. So this is interpreted by the later generations of Confucians as a clear indication that Confucius was an atheist. I wouldn't go that far, but at the end of the 19th century, where we are right now, there is a momentum gaining. There is a tendency gaining momentum, which goes into the direction that a proper Confucian is somebody who does not dabble with the spiritual. And I put down the names of a few. Chen Hongmo, for example, he lived in the mid-Qing period, during the Qianlong period. In fact, he is born in the year when the Qianlong emperor steps down, which was when? Oh, sorry. No. Yes. No. It's when. No. This is. I'm not seeing things properly. This is 1696. Sorry, it's not 1796. So 1696, 100 years before the Qianlong emperor steps down. So this is. He lives essentially in the as a young man. He lives in the Kangxi period. He gets the whole of the Yongzheng reforms, and then he lives through most of the Qianlong period, 1771. And because of this, he is part of the revival of Confucianism, special branch which is known as Kaozhengxue, the Kaozheng movement, the movement which is there are many translations many suitable translations for the term, but school of evidential scholarship is one of the terms that has stuck, and what they try to do is actually goes in parallel to what Europeans were doing at exactly the same point in time. And unless you put the blame for this on the Jesuits, these are two developments which happen in a parallel fashion without any direct interaction. And what both do, the Europeans at that time and the Chinese, the Confucians at that in the 18th century, is to search for truth in facts. What's it? Search facts in truth. No, search truth in facts. So they analyze. They're supposed to analyze everything before they make a pronouncement. And of course, 就是 is the name of the Communist Party organ now. It comes from that period, and it's the idea that you actually base your own assumptions on objective analysis. So this is something which later times the communists would do in the Soviet Union. They would go back to this period, the 18th century, the Enlightenment period, where people tried to divorce science from religion. So, and out of this, you get, both in China and in Europe, a simultaneous movement which is actually trying to dissect the spirits from nature, science from religion. And of course, in Europe, you can follow it back to Voltaire and to the French Revolution and the thinkers that came afterwards. And you can continue along the route to Darwin sort of being half in, half out when it comes to the question of whether there is a God. But then people who later followed his thought, they would have thought, yes, there is no God, and it should be our mission, an atheist mission, to propagate a kind of science that exists without God. And of course, the next step is this humanistic idea that it's only people who can look after other people, there is no God. And then you have the Communist International, the second stanza, which starts off with that you don't believe in any superior being. So there's only people on Earth, and there's contradiction between classes. That's where we are in the 20th century. Going back to the Confucians, you get a search for truth, which is in essence the beginning of science, modern science in China, and this is as diverse as taking us to the beginnings of civilization, namely archaeology, beginnings of texts and of everything that can be followed back to the earliest writings, or call it philology. You can also follow back any kind of linguistic development. Of course, here we have to be aware that the Qing are a multi-ethnic and a multilingual state. And but just one example, the Kangxi Zijian, the Kangxi dictionary, is the beginning of the modern way of approaching Chinese characters, and the way it is built up, the way the aids that the methods which aid people in pronouncing these characters, that is something that leads us into a direction which didn't really exist before. Now, so here we have Wei Xiangshu, Yuan Mei. These are people who take the scientific development of Confucianism, if you like, forward into the 20th century. Not Yuan Mei in person, but the people who were influenced by him. And of course, they put academies into place. Then they start to circulate newspapers. Two of these, Xiaonian Zhongguo, we have, and then we have a Jiao Shu, which is a teaching book. This is a book which is meant for the perfection, moral perfection, but also intellectual perfection of people. It's like a school book for general life, and these were circulating now, and this was being done by idealistic Confucians who were trying to educate the population, educate them in order to save them from superstition. And this is the point where we reach the 20th century. You see where these two developments, both in West and in East, they basically, there's a confluence. On the Western educated side, you get a very similar approach, but with different conclusions. Namely, that the most important element of modernity is the introduction of science. And in the West, or the Westerners who visit China, who are most exposed to this idea, who propagate this idea most fervently, are the so-called medical missionaries. The medical missionaries, of course, Peter Parker and so on, you can trace them back into the middle of the 19th century, but in essence they are creatures of the 20th century, because they use the techniques, they use the methods which scientists in Europe, more so than in China, but the thinking, as I said earlier on, is quite similar. They use this in order to arrive at a certain aim, a certain target, and this target is usually very narrowly defined. So for medical missionaries, this would mean healing the body, not healing the mind. Healing the mind, that is something else, that we get to that in a moment. Who runs the hospitals in China, the first modern hospitals? It's often Methodists. You can go to the archives here at SOAS, and you find which were painstakingly constructed by somebody here in the room. They were, I guess, two people. Yes, they give examples, concrete examples of how missionaries actually contributed to the medical revolution that was taking place in China. And Cai Yunpei, who is Cai Yunpei?
Principal of the Beijing University.
Yes, so this is another aspect, this is education. And we have a moment, a very crucial moment in the development of the Qing dynasty, 1904, 1905, when the imperial examinations are being terminated in order to open the door to colleges and universities, the first modern universities, not Confucian Xueyuan academies, but universities. And Cai Yunpei plays a major role in one of the most illustrious of these. And the aim is to create a synthesis between Eastern and Western, Chinese and European, Chinese and Western, because it's also very much American, civilization, and you can see that even expressed in the architecture which they use. But the emphasis is very clearly on science. And now this is the point where the scientists, in terms of ideology, where they clash, because you get a movement where more and more scientists pronounce their rejection of the spiritual. And this is a movement which is actually quite surprising in China, because around the year 1911, around 60% of the of China's elite, that's the late Qing elite, those measuring all people who were actually in charge of important offices in China, 60% had gone to schools which had been either founded or which were actively being managed and taught by Westerners. And these Westerners were almost in all cases missionaries. So you would think that the majority of the the elite, managing elite in China, that they were actually Christian or had positive ideas about Christianity. But far from it. It was so that they felt that the missionary effort was seen in many cases as a burden. And this is something which the missionaries in the early 1920s begin to acknowledge themselves, that they had overemphasized the missionary side, and they had not provided enough leeway for allowing volunteers to step forward and actually to learn. And the Methodists are different. The Methodists actually, in their hospitals, for example, they make a very strong point in not reading to patients from the Bible, for example. They just talk to them. And in cases when the patients or somebody who happens to be working in the same hospital, when they become curious, then they answer questions, and then they introduce the scriptures and so on. So that's the opposite approach, and this is in a way more effective. At the bottom you have Chen Wuxiu. The line says, 吃掉的多，信教的少. The ones who eat religion are many. The ones who really believe in it, very few. That means most people flock to missionary stations and begin to attend churches because they get the material benefit out of it. And who is Chen Wuxiu?
Founding leader of the CCP.
Yes, he's the founder of the Communist Party. He is surprisingly actually open towards Christianity. If you look at his biography and sort of the early works, it's very open mind, but certainly he focuses in on this the spiritual skeptical, the mono-skeptical end of the spectrum, which I referred to earlier. So who do we have? We have people who have a very strong interest in spiritualism, and again we get this both in the West, America, and the Americas actually, because it's also strong in South America and Europe, and in China. But in China it comes in through the treaty ports often, which should make us suspicious. Who do we have? We have people who are interested in demonology from an academic point of view, and Inoue Enryo is a very he's half a translator and half somebody who has a very strong academic interest in finding out which types of demons exist, and also what types of spiritual exercises. That's not the Jesuit spiritual exercises, but the spiritualist exercises people are following in the West, and increasingly also in Eastern Asia. Of course, he's Japanese, so he focuses on Japan. And who writes the introduction? Cai Yuanpei. So because at this time many Chinese students study in Japan, and they would have picked up works like this very easily. So what do we get in the revelations of Enryo? Well, we get trends which completely, in their entirety, are actually at home in Europe. Mesmerism, galvanism. What is galvanism? Does it mean to be galvanized?
Is it electricity?
It's electricity. So yeah, these ladies sitting together being electrocuted very gently, and then it's occultism that of course has it opens itself up to the this is the period when Egyptology is great. Now, of course, you can blame UCL for that, but the discoveries of all these tombs and the deciphering of the characters, the hieroglyphs, that set into motion a process where people all of a sudden woke up in the middle of the night and realized that in their past they had been prostitutes in ancient Egypt, and or they had been they discovered that they have relatives who died and who had through the generations being sent messages from the beyond the grave. So this is something which really sends shockwaves through Europe, and you get this just as if you want to create the cultural boundaries of Europe. If you really want to see how far European culture stretches, it stretches throughout the Russian Empire. Wherever you go, wherever I've been in Russia, and that's in eastern Siberia, even that's in the southern parts, which are now individual states, you have this as you have this fascination for Egyptian mythology, hypnotism. Hypnotism, of course, this is a scientific way of putting people to sleep. Before we had other techniques, but the paranatural can actually only be explained if you believe in the natural. So this is actually parascience. These are the borderline cases, what you get on trash TV, when you find a UFO landing in your backyard, and this is, I swear I saw it, and this is this has its beginnings in the time when science really establishes itself. So you have the belief in the Twilight Zone, and then the psychic, and the psychic, of course, coincides with the rise of psychology, and psychology is a science, and the psychic is a non-science. It's you are just again in a twilight zone. You begin to establish contact with your subconscious, but then the psychics believe that beneath the subconscious are often other messages which are being transplanted there. So this is quite similar to the idea of the occult, and this is something that ties in with the discovery of India as well, where you get the idea of reincarnation. And again, you have a whole cycle that sort of develops and attracts a very great cycle. I'm halfway through my paper and we're 1 hour into the lecture, so I think I have to make an effort. So the medical missionaries have yes. So here you have examples. How was this reflected? Sources I found, that's the Shenbao, for example, and something that translates as the Central Daily News, which is one of the newspapers which covers Republican China. Then you also have local papers. For example, I consulted the Guangzhou. No, it is called something else. We get that. Oh, here. The Tianjin Shibao. That would be one of the Tianjin. The Chinese Times is called, but anchored in Tianjin. And then there's the Dongfang Zazhi, which is very important, based where? In Shanghai. So, and then you have also a also local publications for Beijing and for Guangzhou, which I found here, and you get constant comments by these editors in editorials. So these are not usually news stories. These are comments on the tendencies of the time, and they comment on the increasing trend towards spiritualism. So and they do that in a very negative way. They treat it almost as superstition, and you will see that 10 years later in the propaganda efforts of the Kuomintang, but then also of the Chinese Communist Party, it becomes an outright war against superstition, and you have volunteers going into the villages and telling them that they should throw away the effigies of their village gods because they are ineffectual and they lead them astray. So you get comments such as "xu huang so delusory feelings, and then also again this constant reminder instead to pursue valid quests such as the one for Weisheng. Weisheng is the term for hygiene, and this is what the newspaper editors, who are of course they are both products of the Confucian attitudes and Western education, and this meets here, and they wage a frontal attack against the superstition that they encounter, and they write that these feelings are these ideas. They're also being followed by people who should know better, such as city dwellers. Now, yes, and then we have talked about the medical missionaries. So you would think that this wave of scientific, rational thought, even if married to Christian convictions, that they would more or less take over the Christian missions in China. However, we have a tendency that in certain areas of China, and the parts which I looked at, they follow the newspapers which I found. So it's usually for northeastern China, but also some cases from Guangdong. That it was the missionaries, the Western missionaries, the Western Protestant missionaries, who were absolutely convinced that the areas where they were operating, and that was usually in the countryside, that they were being inhabited by spirits, by ghosts, and these spirits were at times taking possession of people in the houses that they came to visit, and you could see that in the same texts where, I have Dougal Christie here, for example, in the same text where he ridicules the clueless Chinese practitioners who offer their patients tiger meat. Who condemn them for suggesting that the patient had eaten tiger meat and was therefore being punished by the tiger god. He ridicules these traditional practitioners, and that was something that was very fashionable at the time. Traditional Chinese medicine did not exist at the time. It was being as a scientific discipline. It was ridiculed as complete superstition and quacksalvery. And the same missionaries, they speak they're extremely convinced of the fact that they're actually fighting against Satan and against the expressions of Satan in the patients who they are visiting. Now, How much time do I have to speak? That's the
Not a great deal.
No.
10 minutes?
10 minutes. Okay, good. 10 minutes is all I need. So yes, it's So what was the
Maximum.
Okay, you can you can pull the cable if you want that. What was the usual way of proceeding for farmers? Well, people in the countryside, they would first go, if somebody was ill in their house and they wouldn't get better, they would first call for the village doctor, who was usually a traditional practitioner. If that didn't work, they would go one step up. That would be to a Taoist or a Buddhist cleric, who would use their own insight into medicine, but importantly also their connection to the higher levels of nature and the spirits, in order to get the illness adjusted. If that didn't work, they would call for a Western doctor. This is the common practice in late 19th century, early 20th century. And many of the Western doctors were also missionaries. So there we go. Yes, so again, you have these examples. Here's one from Tianjin. I translated it. There's a class of idle and ignorant men who, having acquired a smattering of medical practice, certain diseases by reading some quasi-medical publication, pretend to be able to cure every known malady. They get their living by deceiving the people and do more harm than good to the sick. A native doctor called to cure a boy suffering from high fever was a surgeon who dealt in no internal remedies. He thrust a long rusty needle into a certain vital part of the body. Upon the withdrawal of the needle, the blood rushed out in a copious stream until the patient bled to death. The doctor ran away without even trying to stop the hemorrhage. The doctor was later found and menaced, though let off after he promised to pay for the funeral costs. Let this be a warning to the friends of the sick, the paper admonished, and never hire doctors without first finding out their reputation and skill. So this is from a Chinese paper. So this is, then next, Westerners, again, they rail against the use of local doctors, but on one occasion, one of these doctors is being called to that's Glover, who we had before, let me just see whether we have them. Yes, here. They were. This is from the. This is until the gods took possession. Yes, here. This is an example from the Boxer period, and you will recognize the references to the that they declared themselves invulnerable to foreign swords and bullet. That was, of course, the idea that they were given. But here, that's the account that I was after. Strange movements, passes and contortions. This is the foreign missionary doctor who is actually visiting a sick girl in a house. Were practiced until the devotee fell down in a fit or trance, sometimes uttering unknown words and uncouth sounds, said to be the language of the spirits, which had now entered into him. He's not a girl, that's another one. When he rose, he was a true boxer and invulnerable. Superstition and imitation also worked also on the susceptible nervous temperament of the Chinese. Again, look at the words used. And many fell down because they believed they would, and because their neighbors did. Was not Satan himself the evil spirit who entered into these boxers in their trance? No, this is Glover who reports on the, yes. Mm-hmm. And the explanation to this is that the manifold demon, referred to as legion in Mark 5 and Luke 8 and Matthew 8, had clearly entered into the Ihotuan converts. So in other words, the explanation which is being used in order to describe the erratic behavior, and actually the convictions that were ridiculed by the missionaries, they are actually being justified with references to demon possession in the Bible itself. Shundor, Jugo Christi, and here we have Nevius, but no, we don't have him, but I show you Nevius anyway. So he's one of the main demono enthusiasts. But in the year 1900 as well, Jugo Christi entered the house of a potential convert. And this lady in question seemed to lose all control over herself. And for what follows is this description. I can only describe it as a species of devil possession. We learned that she was a witch or spirit medium, which he takes at face value, and was in consequence subject to such possession at any time. In the first stage, it was a distressing sight to witness, but distress became horror, as the fearful realities of the power of darkness passed before us and penetrated beyond the senses of the inmost parts of our being. There was no violence of any kind. She simply sat on her doorstep, looking straight before her, with dulled eyes, dead to all expression, and apparently just going off into a swoon. And just when the missionary couple were about to assist her medically, the woman straightened herself, and with vacant, stony stare into space, began an incantation. As the weird strain rose and fell upon the air, it made one's very flesh creep. For the burden of it was our Lord Jesus, whom he preached. Higher and higher rose her voice after each pause, and more animated grew her gestures, as she chanted, I know not what blasphemy against the Holy One of God. I cannot describe what it was to be in the presence of such a manifestation of spiritual wickedness. The atmosphere about us seemed suddenly impregnated with a subtle influence of evil unknown before. It was as if the personal Satan, capital S, stood beside us, and the air we drew in were charged with his very breath. No one who had stood with us and seen what we saw or heard, what we heard, could have doubted for a moment what, or rather who, that cause was. The incantation was its own evidence that it was an inspiration of the devil, and one of the most devilish of its kind, a wail of woe rising from the heart of sin-stricken, Christless China. There's another part which refers to medication, but I'll leave that aside for the time being, and there are other examples of spirit possession as well. Nevius, of course, is the one that you find. Yes. So I'm finishing here. So this is the so Nevius here with his quote has the final word. He said that he himself, 1897. So this is before the published before the Boxer Rebellion. He comes as one of these enlightened Westerners, and he begins with a confession. And this develops, if you read his books, that the area around his missionary base was actually infested by demons and by spirits, and that part of his missionary duty was actually exorcising the devils that he found. Thank you very much.